Hello, good morning, everyone. It's Kirsten here at the Normalized Money Show, and I'm here with Julie. We are on episode number 3 to talk with teenagers and at-risk adults, making sure that you guys are getting the necessary information so that way you can be financially savvy in life, or at a minimum, make sure that you can get an apartment, a car, and then eventually buy a house so that way you're not homeless. And so the Normalized Money Show is coming to you from Katie's House Foundation, which is a nonprofit 5013C housing foundation for affordable housing in beautiful homes. So Julie, good morning. Do you want to say hello to everyone?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for coming on. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Follow us each week for an informative lesson. We talk little small talk about what's current events or current things that are going on, and tie those into, the fact that everything comes back to K-money, right? So it's always going to come back to something that's probably going to affect you on a daily basis. So that's what we're talking about. And yeah, thanks everybody for showing up, and pass it on to your friends.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, definitely. So making sure that other people, are getting this information, because after this quick Normalized Money show today, Julie and I are actually going to start taping off discussing about homelessness in particular. And we're going to start airing episodes towards investors and then just people who want to tune in to talk about the homelessness conversation in the United States, and how the cost of housing is getting so high. Most people, unless they know how to leverage credit, and spread out a monthly payment, which they can afford, and they know how to get a job, and make sure that it's a job that they like, that they can sustain long term. So if that's being an entrepreneur, all kinds of things go into this money conversation. And like Julie said, it always comes back to probably money, unfortunately. And that is just the way
credit.
of the world.
Or credit, because you just mentioned credit and getting that that ability to show that you can be responsible with money, right? And I've noticed more and more on Facebook, I have more and more posts showing up saying, I'm trying to find a 2-bedroom, I'm trying to find a 1-bedroom house, I'm trying to find a studio, I'm trying to find housing. And they, they go on to say their story about how they've had 2 realtors and that they've applied, and it always comes out to somebody with a better credit score. And again, those landlords are looking for, and I'm a landlord. So yeah, my background is in law enforcement. My background's in real estate investing. And obviously through the law enforcement, I see countless people that are homeless and countless teens that are couch surfers. They're left out, they don't know. And what happens? They don't teach financial literacy in high school. So we're here for you guys. So listen up. Let's go into the first lesson, Kirsten. What do we last week we talked about credit report. We talked about getting a credit card to get on that credit report.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about a few things today. One, we touched on AKAs last week. And so an AKA, or otherwise known as, is really important. I'm curious, in a minute, I want to ask you a question of how law enforcement does when people give them different names. But in the credit world, when we see different names come across on a credit report, then we will ask for a letter to be signed letting us know what the names are that you have used in the past. Now, that actually might become an issue when you actually pull the report if you're using a different name, because it might not be able to pull in. But the important things when someone goes to pull your credit report is going to be your social security number. Make sure that every number is accurate, because if you're 1 digit off, that could be a problem. Use the same name over and over. So Julie, you were talking earlier about, if you're a junior, a senior, etc. And then your date of birth. So these are important. Also, your current address. And so if you're homeless, or if you're constantly moving every 6 months, normally they're looking for 2 years worth of addresses. And if you don't have an address that you are able to give out consistently, or if you're using your mom or your grandma or your guardians and not establishing your own, while that's going to be fine for a while, the truth is that you really need to start as an adult to have these same consistent type of information living in the same place for a year or two. And of course, really quickly, I just want to mention on the Social Security number how important it is for every teenager and every parent to make sure that they have their child's Social Security card, because without that, a lot of times they can't get a job. And we have seen in the homeless community, when we're housing people, that one of the reasons they can't get work is because they actually don't have their birth certificate or their Social Security card. And it becomes such a runaround for them to get a picture ID, which you need to have, a picture ID and one of those other documents. So not just for credit, but for actually getting a W-2 job, you need to have those. So Julie, do you have anything to touch on around any of this?
Yeah, so we'll back up a little bit. One of the lessons that we were talking about last week was the credit report itself and looking at the credit report. And when you look at that credit report and you see that you've got a name, and say your name is Richard when you're born, but you started using Ricky, and you've got Richard and Ricky on there, those are the kind of things that you want to, as young adults, you want to be consistent with what you're putting on your credit applications, your job applications, your school information and things, because when you signed up for school, your parents signed you up or somebody signed you up under the name that's on your birth certificate. And if that's what's on your Social Security card, you got to keep it consistent. And you don't want to apply for a credit card because now they call you Ricky and you're so used to writing down Ricky that you don't put down Richard, or you put down Bob instead of William, or these are just common names. You could have a very unique name and you go by Jax or Jackson, and everybody calls you Jax, so you just put Jax down. Well, the issue with that is that now the credit report is going to have both those names. And you touched a little bit on addresses. Same thing. Keep those streets spellings the same. And each time you get, so think of, YouTube here, or you think about Facebook, you think about Instagram, they have algorithms. They are actually running in the background, and they're trying to put down, they're going to try to give you what you're looking for, what your most common searches are, or whatever, right? Well, the credit report is actually giving you a number based on what they see on your credit report, right? So if they see more names than, your name, they're going to say, we're going to deduct here because now we don't know if this is the right, what's going on here. So if you look at things that are on your credit report and they are inconsistent, and this is just something that, we're trying to tell them right off the bat, just be consistent with what you're putting down on these important documents, bank documents, anything like that, because the more consistent you are with that, the less you're going to have problems down the road. And when it comes to stealing your identity, you're going to know if somebody, you never use that name, that second name, Jax or Jackson. You always use Jackson, never Jax. Somebody signed up a credit card under your name, under Jax. Now right? It's not you. It's definitely not you. And
Right.
and now it's a little bit easier to find right away, right? Because that you get something in the mail and it says half your name, not your full name. Because you shorten your name. Liz, instead of Elizabeth, it's Liz. So those are the kind of things that I'm saying, don't use other, laziness when it comes to filling out these things. And getting that driver's license, the same thing. It's going to be what's on your birth certificate, right? And you said the one thing that you need to try to gather up right away is some of these important documents, and always put them in the same spot so that you have them, and that you make a copy of them so that if you lose one, you have another one. And those are the kind of documents that when you as a banker are going to look at these things, now that these are consistent, the score is going to be higher. That's just like free points, right? Free points on your credit report.
Well, it's interesting, some of these things that you touched on. The big takeaway from what we're talking about here, in my opinion, is, yes, the consistency, but also knowing your own personal information and taking that responsibility. Because I will tell you, being in underwriting, which is right? I'm the person who actually looks at the credit report and I determine the risk if I want to give you $1 million or any amount of money. That's what I do
$5,
in banking.
right?
Yeah. So I mean, $300, $5. I mean, the point is that one, if you're using a bunch of different name spellings, yes, there's going to be some trouble there with the reporting, with just pulling in accurate information. But also, some banks actually do Google people, because we can gather so much information on social media. And so we can actually see different things like where you're working. And if you have different name variations, now we start to wonder how much truth is actually in the entirety of the application. And so I know that in the teen world, people that I've employed, so I've had, 10 different companies since 2008. A lot of them were startups. Some of them were successful and I sold them. I have, some other type of things going on with real estate investments. But what I'm getting at is that I'm aware that the teenager crowd likes to use like rap names or cool names. And the thing is that you really can't have those inconsistencies when it comes to these, what Julie's saying, applying for a job, applying for credit, opening a bank account, talking with, I would think, law enforcement, right? Don't you guys, when you stop somebody, want them to use the same name all the time?
Well, again, you're getting a birth certificate when you're born, and you should be getting a social security card at the same time, or social security number. And from that, you're going to take that to get a driver's license or an ID. Now, when you're a juvenile and you're not quite in the system yet, now if it's come down to the point where you either need a passport or an ID card to get on an airplane or to go somewhere. So, and I know, your background, you didn't really probably get on a plane until you were probably in your 20s or 30s.
Right.
So you may not have had an ID card at all. And so you went maybe to your school to get a permit to work, or you had somebody take you to get an ID card because you couldn't get a job without it, right? So
Right.
that's where it's very important that if you have that ID card, I'm going to go off your ID card and say, hey, do you have any ID on you? It's going to have a picture of you. It's going to be issued by the state, and it's going to have your correct name on it, because that employee that's working at that facility is going to put down that name that's on your on your birth certificate. And they're going to put it on your driver's license, and they're going to put your picture next to it. And that's going to start from there.
Right.
Like I said, everything that you put down needs to be on that social security card, because that social security card should match up with your birth certificate. But most importantly, your birth certificates may have 2 middle names. It may have 1 middle name. It may have no middle name. But if your social security card was reported as just a middle initial, use just that middle initial. Those algorithms that they give you are going to be better, and that you're going to be more fundable in the future, because those things are going to match up. So when I stop you and I see you on the street and you just give me your name verbally and I put you in the computer, sometimes if you don't give me your middle initial, it may not find you. If you give me your middle initial and your date of birth, the correct date of birth, it will find you. Now, after a little bit, if you're using other names, if you've shortened your name, most of the time when you're juvenile, these they don't really keep track of that. It's not until you get older that they start keeping track of whether or not you're using a different name. And that could be a mistake by the officer that wrote it out. He didn't write your full name down, or he didn't write something down, and so they gave you an extra name on your report. Now, that's not something that, as you go for a job, as you go for anything, it's it's essential that you put down that proper name that's on that social security card and on that driver's license, and they should match. Those are the things that are gonna be in the police computers, right? Whether it be federal, state, or local, we all different ones. We have all different computers, and they're going to be put in there. Obviously, I would think if you went and got the state ID, that's where they're going to track you from, right? So I would to answer your question, you know, we use the same kind of thing that you would use as a banker. When
Okay.
you look at, you know, like I look at something and it comes back that this guy's name, he's got a very common name, you know. Um, he's Mike Smith, and I got to look and I got to see if he's got anything that's going to make him stand out. Now, and I have had people, younger officers that I've gone and helped, they've stopped somebody and the things don't match up, and at some point we got to take your fingerprints. You know, we got to say, well, sorry, I can't tell just by looking at this if you are who you say you are or not. So we got to fingerprint you. And that eventually, obviously, if those people were arrested previously, they're going to have fingerprints on file. They're going to have the ability to match those to that person. So,
I have another question.
okay.
So what happens if I give you the wrong name because I'm trying to hide something? And you
Well,
find
if you give me the wrong name and it's an actual real person's name, depending on whether or not they have a driver's license or an ID card, and depending on or not if they actually know this information that's correct, because like you said, when you fill that out, you can't be a digit off. You can't be. So a lot of times, if you gave me a name and it didn't come back right, it would just come back not on file. Now, when you're younger, we don't really, that's not really a red flag for us. But obviously, when you get older and you're working and you've got your name established, you know, you're not 12 years old, you're 17 years old, you know, you've done a couple things, you've had some, you know, just like if you Googled your name, you know, what would you find if you Googled your name? So we would actually have it come back as not on file, it's called. So it's like it can't find you, it doesn't know who you are. So usually that's most of the time it's a red flag, right? Because now
right.
it's like,
Who
this
are you?
person does exist, you know. And again, when the states give you a driver's license or an ID card, they assign a number to it. So a lot of times I'll use that number and then I'll go back and look at the name. And like I said, sometimes the middle name will be two middle names. Sometimes the middle name will just be an initial. Sometimes, so it does come back to trying not to use those extra names. If you put your name as my name's on here is Jay Gunfire, right? I'm not going to go and apply for my job as Jay Gunfire. I'm not going to go put myself out there as that, as a real person. I have a real identity. I was born.
Right.
I have people that have, you know, they don't want it. They black out all their windows. They don't want to be noticed, you know, so
Right.
they want to try to not have their name out there. Um,
But you
and
can't do that. You can't, as an adult, you cannot think that that is going to be beneficial.
well, it isn't. It actually will it eventually will come back to you, because you're either going to get denied at the airport because they're so strict at the airport now, or you're going to get denied financially, right? The landlord's going to look at it and be like, I don't believe this. This doesn't even, you couldn't make this up. It doesn't look right, you know?
Right.
And those are the kind of things that, you know, it seems kind of cool, but when it comes out to be something that is a responsibility, it's something that you're trying to show that you're, you know, out there, that's when it's important to do that. And that's what kind of what my, you know, last time we had started talking about this is, hey, you know, it's really important that we do this from the start so that we're not running into problems later trying to clean it up.
Yeah, I think it also comes with a certain level of maturity where if you're a teenager or you're an adult who maybe in your younger years, you thought it was cool to kind of have some nicknames. I think that there comes a point where across all of your social media and even, you know, on all of these legal forms and dealing with law, that you really just, like you said, I have an identity. This is who I am. And I need to be able to use that because I will tell you again, when I go to hire somebody, if they refuse to use their actual name, which is what goes on their business card, that becomes very difficult for customers to call them and do business with them or to find them online and verify, like, I feel comfortable dealing with this sales rep because of the variation in what they're showing me online, and these kinds of things. And so, yeah, we use, you know, K Money and J Gunfire just on the channel here. But you will see on our social medias, for all intent and purpose, they're pretty close to our names, as much as they can be given any type of privacy rules. So anyway, I want to move on now to talking about music. And Julie, you and I have talked about that Jason Aldean song, Try That in a Small Town. And so I thought that we could share that with our viewers. And
sucker punch somebody on the sidewalk, carjack an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool, act a fool if you like, cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. Got a gun that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're gonna round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town full of good old boys, raised up right. If you're looking for a fight, try that in a small town. Try that in a small town. Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town.
so Julie, what do you think about that video and the words? And, I'm asking you in particular because of your law enforcement background, but also because you've lived in a small town, you've lived in a large town. So I'm just curious, what's your takeaway about that music?
Obviously I have no problem with that video and I have no problem with the song. I grew up in a big town and then I moved to a much smaller town in the Midwest. So I understood how hard it was to assimilate into that smaller town. And I think that, obviously some of the people that got upset about this video and got upset about some of the things, it was being upset about the fact that this was played in front of that courthouse, that there was a little bit of history behind that courthouse, and that the videos that he's showing in the background, and he's showing, he speaks about, spitting in the cop's face and acting, like just acting out, right? And you and I have talked about this a little bit before, and I'll try to keep it pretty short here because I know we're running. We try not to be run this long. It really comes down to these are crimes of opportunity, right? And these videos that he's showing are all kids that are either carjacking, armed robbery, these kinds of things. And obviously his message is, we in a small town, we don't tolerate that. We don't expect the cops to clean up our business, right? We're going to clean up our business. We're going to keep our kids behaving. We're going to keep our citizens responsible. We're going to keep our citizens, what word am I looking for? Accountable, right? We're going to be accountable for your actions. And as a teenager, and I think we touched on this a little bit before, is the system is made for a reform system, right? So we give our teenagers a chance. You make a mistake, we don't throw the book at you, and we don't make you, again, if you're going to keep making these mistakes and you're going to not learn from your mistakes, then yeah, you're going to get bigger and bigger punishment, and you're going to be treated like an adult because we're expecting you to take that opportunity to learn. That's wrong. Correct yourself, move on. And so he's basically saying we're going to take care of our own, and we're going to have this higher expectation, where in a bigger city, it's a crime of opportunity. If there's 50 people standing around and the one kid sees to himself, hell, I can take these shoes. No one's going to see me. I'm just going to take them because I couldn't afford to buy them. I'm never going to be able to afford to buy them. So I'm just going to take them. And that's where I think it becomes a cancer. And it becomes more and more people start doing it. And then it looks like there's, more and more issues in that, whole.
But specifically in that scenario, let's just talk about the shoes, right? You and I have had conversations about how people steal because, like in the sober living house that we had going, when somebody vacated, we thought there was a theft, and you reminded me, like, well, because that person needs that thing, it doesn't make it right. But back to the video. So if you steal shoes in a small town, it's probably pretty likely that, that shoe shop owner is going to call the police or call his friends. And before you can get out of that small town, you're probably going to get stopped. Because there's not that many people to deal with, right? But when you're dealing with 250,000 people, there's obviously a lot more cars and people to try and account for.
And in a small town, they know each other. They know the families. They know, like when I moved into a smaller town and I came to town, we were known as the California people, So it was like, if I went into a store, that store owner knew who to talk to find out who I was, or knew that that person I was hanging out with belonged to this family and that they could go to that family. You go into a bigger town and you've got this, like you said, 250,000 people. You've got cars that all look alike. And again, it's a mental, like, oh, this is an opportunity. They'll never know who I am. They don't know me. Whereas you walk into like I was a school officer, and there's a CVS nearby, and I had stopped. It was on my way back to school, and I saw these younger kids from the school in the CVS, and the kids looked at me, and I knew they were stealing. I just knew by the way that they were acting and the way they were looking, and they looked right, and they knew that I was going to tell their parents, and they hightailed it out of there. So it was like I was actually a crime deterrent, right? Because they thought that, they're not going to recognize us. They're not going to know who we are. But then the minute I was there and I knew who they were, that they didn't do it.
Yeah. And so in a small town, people know who you are. They know what family you belong to in a lot of cases. And so I think the media latched on to this, or a lot of people did, because of the courthouse, which you referenced, which has some, if I remember correctly, the lynching that took place. And so, I'm not in favor of people picking iconic places to do these kinds of videos that maybe have some kind of a racial undertone. I will point out what I thought was interesting is that, there was all races doing all kinds of rioting all over the country and the world in a lot of those videos that they were referencing in that music video. And so I think it's important, right, that we're able to discuss these types of things in a mature fashion. And so if people have comments on this video about how they feel, and I'd like to hear those. And then also, I know that when this video came out, some of my friends were commenting on how they have been treated unfairly in small towns, and so maybe that was their takeaway, is that, and that could be due to race, religion, sex, in a small, meaning they had some bad experiences in small towns. And so if people are trying to say that, well, a small town is better than a big town, that's personally not my takeaway. I do like the fact that, people, whether you're in a small town or a big town. And again, I believe in diversity. I think that the personal responsibility portion of it and taking care of your neighbor or your community is what makes communities where we want to live, right? So people right now are actually leaving a lot of areas because of the lack of, I guess, being a good neighbor and maybe watching out for your neighbor. Does that make sense, Julie? Like the bad neighborhoods, what do you think makes a bad neighborhood versus a good neighborhood, whether it's in a small town or a big town?
Well, my short answer to that is your environment, right? And what accountability is around you. Prior to COVID, I would say that the state of affairs for a lot of suburban areas outside of bigger cities, it was very much come home, shut your garage, go in your house, don't know your neighbors. You know, I don't see what I can't, see. I don't, you hear nothing, see nothing. I mean, I'd go to people's houses and I'd be like, hey, like, what can you tell me? I'm trying to find this person, and they wouldn't know anything about them. And literally they live next door. I think some of this has changed now because people were forced to be at home and they were forced to go out in their front yard because they wanted to go outside, right? And they wanted to be normal. And they were like, I can't go, I can't go to the store. I can't hide. I can't do that. I want to be normal. So they actually did get a little bit better in the sense that they did find who their neighbors were. So people, I think, got out a little bit in the last, 5 years comparably to 10 years ago. But, to go back to your comment about, some people have had bad experiences in small towns. I think, you were raised in a little bit bigger of a town, much bigger town, even though it was not a major city. You were outside of a major city that was very large, which was much like my upbringing. But then when I moved to a small town, there's benefits and there's drawbacks, right? Like I said, I couldn't go into the local grocery store and even think about doing something bad that I was going to be anonymous and that he would never figure out who I was. And that was because I was with a friend who was like everybody knew everybody else in town, right? So I think you come back to that whole idea that, like getting to know the people around you makes it so that your environment is a better way of living per sense, right? Because if I saw somebody go to my neighbors and it wasn't somebody I recognized, I would call the police and I would say, hey, somebody's, and trying to get in the neighbor's house, or somebody's trying to do something. Not only may they do it to my house, but they're doing it to my neighbor's house. I'm going to, even if it was just a relative that came by and was, told that this was where the key was and to go in the house. But that's an
looking out for each other. It's looking out for each other and knowing your neighbors. And so we're going to wrap up this video here, but I think this environment conversation and also where you live, is an important facet to your mental health. Whether that's inside your house, right, behind closed doors, what's going on inside, but also when you go outside in just your neighborhood, what's going on just on your block, and then what's going on in downtown or uptown. And again, I think a lot of this plays into the mental health, and that your financial capacity dictates if you are going to be able to apply for a loan to get a nice, reliable car. Maybe it's not nice, maybe it's just reliable, but it gets you to a job. And again, if you have, some time on the job and you got your credit report in a good condition, you can buy a nice house or a nice condo in one of these nicer areas that you feel more comfortable in. And also, I grew up, at one point, I lived in a single wide mobile home for several years, and it was like a tin can. And it was in Poway, California, which is a really nice area of San Diego, California. But I will tell you, my environment inside of that particular house was very different than, of course, when I was able to move into my own apartment. It wasn't in a mobile home park, even though the park was nice. But these environments that you and I are talking about and the expectations that our parents have of us or that we have of ourselves are going to really determine what happens day to day and then throughout our life, right?
Right. And that's, I mean, again, you didn't mention the one thing that, money helps you with too, and that's education. And getting that sense that you are confident in what you're doing, and that you come out of that shell as you get older, and you realize, hey, I don't have to beat myself up. I know this. I know what I'm doing. I'm comfortable. And that's, as you're younger, you're awkward. It might just be a social thing. It might be this, it might be that, but you eventually start getting more confidence in yourself, and you get that education, and you want to learn more, and you want to be a better person. And that's where I think your brain develops. There's a lot of things going on. You're not maybe so impulsive, and that those things will straighten themselves out. It's just doing these little things when they're younger, and they're just starting out, that they're not having to correct all these things later, and taking those opportunities in those environments that they're in, and instead of doing those harder decisions when they're younger is again, obviously we can talk about the whole thing on another episode about getting into trouble and how to come out of that, but we don't want to see them get into such financial trouble too, that they can't feel like they're ever going to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will wrap this episode right now, guys. I think the important thing here is, please take the time to listen into our channel. We have 20 years doing what we're doing, and very unique advice. And we know you're watching YouTube anyway, and all the social medias. So let this video play through, subscribe, tune in. It's going to be for teenagers and at-risk adults. The Normalize Money show is on Saturdays. It drops at 6 a.m. Pacific time. And then our new shared housing academy, essentially for investors, is going to drop Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So thanks so much, and we'll talk with you guys next week. Bye, Julie.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Subscribe.